Welcome to NOAA Central Library's educational platform for the presentation of research and ideas in support of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's mission. Today's library seminar is titled Bringing the State of the World's Fisheries Assessment into the 21st Century. What is needed to improve our global coverage and how to make the assessment accessible to interested parties globally. The presentation is part of the National Stock Assessment Science Seminar Series, which is developed by NOAA Fisheries and organized by Kristen Blackheart. Today's speakers, Rishi Sharma and Arni Magnusson, will be introduced by Kristen. Before I hand over the microphone, here are a few housekeeping items for our live audience members to improve your viewing experience. If you have trouble with the audio or visual components of GoToWebinar, we suggest that you log out and rejoin us. This resets the software and usually resolves most technical issues. Our presentation is being recorded today and will be available on the NOAA Central Library YouTube channel later today. I have added the link to our channel to the chat box. Also, we're very interested in your questions and we encourage you to ask them throughout the seminar, even though the speakers will not address them until the end of their presentation. All audience members are muted, so type your questions or comments in the chat box under questions located in the control panel of GoToWebinar. So that last detail, let's get started. The mic is yours, Kristen.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm really excited to introduce Rishi and Arni today, and many thanks to them for joining us today. I think they might actually be interrupting their summer holidays to be with us. So Rishi and Arni are with the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, but they're probably familiar to most of you. They both completed their studies at the University of Washington and probably have collaborated with many of you on the line. And between them, their experience is very wide, ranging from NOAA Fisheries to the IOTC, the Columbia River Intertribal Fisheries Commission, ICES, Icelandic Marine Research Institute, New Zealand Seafood Industry Council. So they've been all over the world working on fisheries issues and stock assessment, and now they're working on global fisheries stock assessment issues for FAO. And I'm very grateful that they are taking a little time today to share their work with us. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rishi to get started. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen. I'll briefly introduce this topic to everyone. I want to give some caveats that this isn't by any way like FAO's position or GFCM's position on anything. This is scientific work in progress, and we are not recommending anything from the viewpoint of FAO and what we are saying in this presentation. With that caveat, I'll start. So why do we do this rapid assessment really? Give a big overview of how this has evolved over time and what it means and why it's important within the UN Sustainable Development Goals agenda. How can we improve some of the estimates that we are using to assess global stock status? Some preliminary tests we've done, and there are 2 papers out on this topic recently in the last few months. Some of the results we will discuss here. What we've learned from that, how this approach can be actually used in a global or a country basis, and sort of the recommendations of how we can use this in a Bayesian updating context, and then go over to, a lot of this is extremely complicated and a lot of people don't see what FAO is doing. So the whole initiative that Arni and I are doing now is providing transparency to the entire assessment globally. So, and we'll show you sort of real time what this approach entails and how it's being done. So in the UN Sustainable Development Goal Agenda, there was a statement basically with agenda item 14.4, which says that we will regulate, harvest, and end overfishing within a certain number of years, and implement science-based management plans to restore fish stocks in the shortest feasible time to levels that can produce maximum sustainable yield as determined by biological characteristics. Now, in order to do that, we really need to have some way to evaluate where these stocks are and provide some guidance and recommendations. And most of the information that we have currently are landings or catch statistics, and often that is not informative, or we're using catch-only models to really assess it, and we'll highlight the issues with catch-only models and why we need to actually expand sort of the toolbox with which we use global assessment approaches. So this is directly taken out from the 2020 report, and you can see from this the trend essentially is that, you know, from the days when John Gulland really started this project back in the mid-70s to the current timeline, we have an overfishing metric which has sort of increased over time to about 34%, and current day it started around 7 to 8%. And the basis of all this is a set of stocks that have been monitored and reported and analyzed on a biannual basis for the last 30 odd years. So approximately 450 stocks, but it's actually more because some of those stocks are actually composites of multiple stocks. And the area where you really want to be in order to maximize production is sort of the middle region. This is underfished, which has obviously become a really small percentage of the global stock assessment that we conduct. And you can see how things vary by different regions, and you can see where we are with overfishing in the Mediterranean versus the Pacific or Eastern Central Sea as one extreme to the other extreme. However, it's not recommended to do these comparisons by region because the methods are quite different by each of these regions, and we rely on expert elucidations. The methodology can vary depending on who does it and how it's done. So even though you can look at this for a comparative purpose, they're not equivalent in exactly how they're being done. Some of these regions have a lot of stocks which have no assessments and rely on expert elucidations, while others have a lot of stock assessments and very little expert elucidation is required. So essentially, we've got 18 regions in the world, and you can see the spread of the regions globally. Assessments are quite varied depending on the species we look at within each region, and then inferences are based on an assessment that is either done by a regional body or a country, which we utilize in the assessment directly, or we use landings data and some expert elucidation methods to assess what's going on. And the three categories essentially that, if you're using biomass-based reference points to really assess things, you have an underfished region which says B over BMSY is greater than 1.2. If B over BMSY is less than 0.8, it's an overfished category, and if it's between 0.8 to 1.2, we say it's fully sustainably fished. Now, there are a whole bunch of other reference points that you can use in the literature, which are identified here, but for purposes of what FAO does, this is the standards that we've been using for the last 30 years, and this is the standard that we will be taking forward into the future. Now, how that's really done within a region, I'm not going to go into this into too much detail, but if you have an actual assessment, obviously it's taken directly out of the assessment and it's easy. If you don't, then you might have a CPUE series or a length-based analysis or catch trend analysis, or a combination of the two or three, which region experts really look at the data and come up with the classification of what's going on in those areas. It's not straightforward. It's extremely complex, and it's not very well documented currently, other than there's a report on this in 2011, which was an update of the report that John Gallant took out in the 70s with some, minor tweaks in the mid-90s. So there are three different reports. There have been minor updates in each of these approaches, and we're coming to the point now that, we may want to look at this in a different manner with more of a transparent sort of assessment framework, which is what Arni and I are working on together. You can see also that, as I said before, when you're doing comparative analysis from different parts of the world, if you're looking at North America and Europe, you've got a lot of coverage of assessments, and so your inferences may be pretty good. Whereas if you're looking at Africa or Asia or some parts of South America, you don't have a whole lot of stock assessments, and so you're relying on some other approach to really do this work. Which is why, catch-only models were sort of a proposed toolbox, because we could standardize the approaches across regions. However, when this is a package that has been developed by University of Washington, Ray Elbaum's lab, and Dan Ovando is the primary developer, developed this package with the opportunity to really try different things within a standardized catch-only model framework. And so at one end, you have just the catch heuristics that are used for these models. And at the other end, you have a full-blown, you could even have a sort of a length-based along with an index-based approach for the assessment. So you have two extremes. We basically are focusing on how well these methods could work, and we tested it on a known data set. We've tested it on different regions and different countries to see how well this really works. And I'm not going to cover this extensively because that's not the focus of this talk. We tested it on a set of stocks and ICs, which were sort of fine-tuned. We chose these sets of stocks very carefully. Henning Winker at GRC went through these stocks and said these are probably a best representation of what's going on in these different regions. ICs does not manage in this manner as we're showing here. It's managed more on a reference point and F-based control rule or F-based target, which doesn't really translate into sort of a Kobe framework that's being illustrated here. But this was a good representation of how well, if we had, stocks which are in the overfished region, or overfishing region, or overfished but recovering, or sustainable region, how well would these methods actually work when we applied them. And what we did was we tried, so we had two different ways of evaluating this. One is in the Kobe framework classification, the other is in the SOFIA framework classification. The left panel shows us the Kobe classification methodology, and the right is the SOFIA classification methodology. And we tested these catch-only models basically with 6 different scenarios. One was basically saying we're going to use the default assumptions. The others are using expert or good starting point with a default catch rule. You have a modified catch rule that we developed with a good starting point. And then the expert is, we are saying basically we have good idea of depletion at the end and at the beginning. And the last two are basically using an index of abundance, which is taken with the biomass time series from the assessment with some noise. But the first one, again, we say we have no idea as to where the initial depletion is, and the last one is saying we have a decent idea when the initial depletion is, and we use, basically the index of abundance to inform us how things are going. And we compared this with both SRAplus, which has been developed by UW, and then Catch MSY Plus, which is being developed by the Poly and Rayner Froese sort of camp, to see how well these methods compare. And you can see over here that, that if you're using it with default assumptions, the models tend to be systematically biased, both CMSY and SRAplus. CMSY Plus, which is the new approach from Poly and Rayner's camp, tends to give you a more pessimistic sort of setup of the stock, versus SRAplus gives you a more optimistic picture of what might be happening to these stocks on the default setups. But as you give more and more information to these models, you move to the right of these curves here, you see that the bias really tends to vanish, and things look a lot better. With obviously, when you've got an index of abundance with a good starting value, then both are doing pretty well in terms of the biomass estimation and in terms of the F estimation. However, again, as I said, when you have less information, CMSY tends to say that the models actually, you're fishing harder than the reference points, and on the other hand, the models from SRAplus are sort of saying that you're doing better than you might actually be doing. So anyway, in a short message here, so when we compared, this is really that representation of what's going on with these stocks, and these 6 approaches are really those 6 different scenarios. And we can see as you have more and more information, the SRAplus toolbox tends to do well when we have some information content on an index and we have a good starting value. They tend to confer quite well. This is the reality. This is what's happening. And the message really is that you need a good initial and final depletion estimates to ground this analysis, especially if you have a shorter time series. How you parameterize the production function is important. And if you have some way of estimating a prior on depletion at the end, then it's really helpful. And the last one is really, it works well on an aggregate but poorly on individual stocks. And there's a paper on this which people can take a look at later on their own time. The other thing that we found out was that there was a serious classification problem with these methods, because you were misclassifying a stock as being okay when it really wasn't. And depending on, even in the best case scenario, you had 15 stocks which were being classified as doing better than they really were, and 33 were accurate. In the worst case scenario, which was basically stocks where you had no information, you were using default heuristics. You got the last point accurate for 28 of the stocks, which was pretty surprising. But the classification was that 15 of these stocks you were saying things a lot better than they were, and 5 were saying they were worse than they really were. But like a type 2 error is okay, but a type 1 error is okay, a type 2 error is not. So because if you're managing based on precautionary principle, if you say things are worse off than they really were, then you'll be taking an action which is benefiting the stock in under uncertainty, versus converse is that you're saying there's no issue when there is an issue, then that's not a good scenario to be under. So the methodology really has some merits. The value of information is really important. Depletion must be within a ballpark when starting the analysis. If you have an effort or CPV based index, that really helps these models, and there's no substitute for on the ground information. There are some other approaches which you can use. Fishery management index or swept area ratio can inform depletion based on data sets where they have trawl intensity, or they have some kind of survey of how well the management systems in different parts of the world operate. You could get a depletion estimate which can inform these models, but again, that's not the purpose of what we're talking here. But another paper that's just come out in Fish and Fisheries with Dan as the lead shows you again the problems with these methods. As you can see, the depending on the assumptions you use and the effort data you use, you get very different inferences of what's going on globally as compared to the RAM legacy database results, which are on the left-hand corner, and then what we are seeing with all these different approaches and the mean average percent error. Again, you can read up more on these methods in those papers. So going back to how do we assess something like the Sustainable Development Goal, which is FAO is the custodian of this. How are we going to use this? Is there any way to really do this work? Normally, countries report a lot of these methods, the data to us, and we are supposed to help them with their analysis, giving them tools, and this was a possible tool that they could use and how they could do the analysis. So if you have different sources of data, and depending on what you have, you can do different types of assessments. Obviously, the highest tier is when you have an index of abundance or an effort series, which can give you a derived index of abundance. But then, obviously, as you have lesser and lesser external data, then you rely on just the catch data and heuristics. So here's sort of an analysis on a country here in Asia with a data set showing a CPU index over time. And you can see there are a bunch of species that we analyzed within that area. And based on that index, survey index of abundance, this is what we see is going on with these stocks, which tells you how the stocks are doing in terms of these 3 categories that we are supposed to report on. And you can see over time really how things have changed from sort of a, 1980s, you had things which are really in good shape. Industrialized trawling came into effect and things started declining for these stocks. And then around 2015, some serious management measures came into place and things started rebuilding from that point on. On another extreme, here's an area which is pretty well studied and analyzed. And if we take these methods with some caveats, we can get a fairly good idea as to what's going on with these stocks, but not exactly the same. So here's a data-rich system. The right-hand side here shows what's actually based on the assessments, what's being said about these stocks. The left-hand side here is using an effective effort assumption and some ideas about depletion based on some Bayesian updating methods based on the SOFIA results from the past. And you don't get the exact coherence. As you can see, this is sort of the region you want to be in between 0.8 and 1.2, but most of the stocks, you know, and again, the assignment error might not be real great, but on the aggregate, you might do okay. None of these methods should be used on an individual basis, but for regional-wide snapshots, I think you can get a pretty good idea as to what's happening. And finally, so the method that we are proposing here is, you know, based on a prior that's based on an expected value that you're seeing within a certain region. If you have 40 or 50 stocks in a certain region, you can calculate the expected value of what depletion should be within that region based on a weighted sort of average, and then you can use a binomial approximation to get CV around that. And then you can put any stock into that with some information on the effort and then calculate what's going on with these stocks. And that's so based on the SOFIA assessments that are done by each of these regions in our database, this is what you could come up with on expected value of depletion for any of these areas with the uncertainty around it. So the next step really, I mean, as we've seen here, we've got this index that we're computing has a data issue, it has an assessment issue, and it has a reporting issue. And primarily, the method developed really looks at 4 steps. We need a reference list of stocks. We need to collect the data for the selected stocks. We need to apply some methodology for the stock status classification. And then we compute the indicator, which is simple proportion. What we've done in the past is, you know, where we have assessments, we use them, otherwise we use the expert elicitation process, and we give equal weight to all the stocks analyzed. We have 445 stocks, which have been updated since '74. They are reported in our database here, but there may be issues of representativeness, as some countries have brought out recently that, you know, some of these stocks aren't even fished anymore, so why are they still in the database? And it's not transparent and it's difficult to replicate. So we are trying to update these stocks now, and we are doing consultative approaches with the countries to really decide which stocks should be used, but we need to have a real clear representation of this, and there shouldn't be a commercial representation, and we need to have this all centralized in one common database. And there are different processes in FAO that are going, which may give conflicting results. The assessment, as you can see, we've tried the standardization with catch-only models, which may not work. So we are thinking of a tiered-based approach on this, and it's quite time-consuming to do all this. And then finally, the reporting issues. We don't have a clear methodology to really go back in time or in place to say who exactly did what. And there's a lot of lack in harmonization as we have a SOFIA approach, we have a Sustainable Development Goal database, we have a global record for stocks and fisheries database, and they could all give you quite different inferences on what's going on. So we have to have this all clearly communicated and what is sort of the gold standard here. Again, I think we've got to really go back. The biggest effect on this analysis is the data that's used, and what are the stocks that we're using. We need to go and revisit that and see if we're going to add a new set of stocks, how does it change our inferences, and convince the countries that this is an issue. And then finally, the the categories of the data used. If it's an unassessed stocks, do we have external data sets that can go with it? And how do we sort of archive and use that? The second thing is really the assessment. Are we going to use limited data and auxiliary info with an expert judgment-based approach? Are we going to use a COM-based approach with catch and auxiliary data? Or are we going to have, a tier 3 where we have the actual assessment from a regional fish body? And are we going to use a weighted indicator or non-weighted? That's all these are important to think about. And in terms of how we will be transparent with all this, we need to update a lot of our documentation, as well as show how we really did the analysis and replicate it globally. So, okay, I'll turn it over to Arni now to show you really the method that we are developing now in terms of having transparent framework for doing this. So, Arni, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Share my screen. Yes. So as you see in the slides over here, what I'm going to demonstrate is basically, Rishi is working on this almost full time, and he just knew that I was in town in Rome and asked if I would be interested in taking a look at the analysis and suggesting some way to organize all of this. I mean, we all struggle with organizing an assessment or a few assessments, but when it comes to basically all the world's assessments, it is no mean task to organize it all so that so that it runs and can be updated and so on. So I came from ICES, as many of you know. My work there for 4 years was pretty much to do that, to work with Colin Miller to find a way to organize all the 200 some annual assessments that ICES gives advice on. And so there was an off-the-shelf solution, TAF, that has been very successful at ICES. And so I thought I could at least show him how that could be used for this analysis. The SOFIA analysis is not a typical stock assessment at all, but TAF, the design is quite general, so it really can be used for any analysis that has data input and some results coming out, and some calculations, of course, in the middle. So he was convinced, and the SOFIA team, that this could be used, the TAF could be used for the for the analysis where he's basically applying these catch and effort methods to sort of fill in the gaps where assessments, official assessments, do not exist. Just want to mention one thing before we dive into some demo. So Area 37, that is was my work for the last 12 months. That is the Mediterranean and Black Sea, where GFCM, the FAO sort of department that handles the Mediterranean and Black Sea, they publish every 2 years an important report called SOMFI, State of the Mediterranean and now Black Sea Fisheries. And so I just want to highlight this report with a link to it, and just to highlight that that is the official and thorough analysis of the stocks in the area. What Rishi and I are doing, or what FAO is doing with SOFIA, on the other hand, is, as I say, it's filling in the blanks where no assessments exist, and also just finding a standardized analytical approach for all the world's oceans. I mean, different regions tend to do things slightly differently, but with SOFIA, they want a truly general approach for all of them. So that is just to emphasize that the SOFIA analysis of the Mediterranean and Black Sea is not what I would call the official analysis of the state of the stocks there. SOMFI is what I would refer people to read about the official statistics for those stocks. But again, they do not cover stocks where no assessments exist. and SOFIA is, of course, for the global context. Okay, with that, I'm going to decide. I think I'll give us about 10 minutes, and I was taking some notes here how I'd like to go about it. So TAF stands for Transparent Assessment Analysis. Let's just open it here, Transparent Assessment Analysis. You can type taf.ices.dk, and that brings you to this sort of landing page of TAF. The T part of it is transparent. So that is really the theme that I'll be covering. How do we make analysis transparent? And as I mentioned, not only SOFIA, not only ICES assessments, but really anything. And that is sort of where I'm coming from, addressing the NOAA crowd, friends and past and future colleagues, how TAF could be useful for NOAA analysis, stock assessments, and also other things. ICES has basically, having a few years of experience with TAF handling assessments, they're introducing it to handle survey, raising catch at age, but also survey indices and things like that. Any analysis that has input and output. So transparent is the keyword, and when in this context, when I say transparent, I'm referring to two things: open and reproducible. So the open part, that's where I'm here. Open, many of us think of open source software, open journals, open data are being more and more common. Open scripts are gradually becoming more common. Once the data are open and we are using scripts to read the data and do the analysis, it is quite tempting, sometimes awkward, to make our scripts open too, so everybody can see them. That was sort of a cultural change within ICES, that people were not used to showing their dirty laundry, if you want. Our scripts are not always very beautiful, but they are the analysis that we did. They are the basis of the advice that very valuable and important stocks, the management is based on that script, on that analysis. So there is a sort of a scientific pressure building on us to make our scripts open. And by now I'm very used to it. They don't always look good, and that is fine. Reproducible analysis. Yeah, so that is, once I've made my scripts open, they may or may not work on your computer. By now, because it's been my sort of focus for quite a few years now, they are by and large reproducible. They should run on your computer. How do I do that? I use relative paths. You know, I don't set the working directory to something that may not exist on your computer, but use a relative path so that things are found in one sort of main directory with some subdirectories that can be found. Also, the software that I use in Rishi's example, the SOFIA example, we're using SRAplus a lot. So as you will see in my demo shortly, I sort of focus on what software is required to run the analysis. I was just writing some draft report yesterday, and I quickly copied a paragraph that I want to say that the scientific demand for open access to data has increased rapidly in fisheries as in other domains of science, along with open access to reproducible analytical workflows, typically R scripts. And as I said, together the data and the analytical workflows form the basis of scientific advice. And so I think at NOAA, these and everywhere else, we're hearing the question that is the management of this stock based on open and transparent science? And if not, which criteria are still missing? So we're seeing more and more stocks managed based on open and transparent science. And TAF is an off-the-shelf tool that can support open and transparent science. But if it doesn't fit comfortably like a glove, you can at least use it as inspiration, sort of what topics we're talking about to make analysis open and transparent. Okay, With 5 more minutes, I think I will show you 2 things. One is a TAF assessment that we sort of call the Hello World of TAF. It's a spotted ray assessment from the Eastern Channel between UK and France. It is a really, really simple analysis, data limited analysis. And after that, I will move on to the Area 37, and you can see the resemblances between the very simple example and the more full-fledged SOFIA example. So with the, let me see, we could go to github.com, Icy Staff, and from there you will find it pinned here, the 2015 spotted ray. So this is open, the data are there, the scripts are there, so you can clone it and run it. It uses this package called Icy Staff that is actually worth spending a minute on. There's been an important development of this TAF tool that it's at a junction now where I would say it might become more and more ICE specific. They're sort of connecting it more and more to different ICE's data products and sort of protocols, you could almost say. It's not there yet, but it's sort of on the drawing board. So it was a very good time for Colin and me, the developers of this package. We sat down this spring and we managed to sort of split it into 2 parts, you could say. TAF is now on CRAN, a package just called TAF, and that is the core functionality with no dependencies. It's a completely self-sustained package, whereas Icy Staff is sort of gradually building more and more dependencies. So TAF is just the core functionality that people like Rishi at FAO or someone like you at NOAA, I think everything you will need is in the TAF package. It sort of just separates the IC specifics from the core functionality, and that's going to be very stable and well supported, obviously, whereas the IC Staff will be seeing more sort of incremental development happening. I think TAF, the functionality is there, and at the moment we can't think of any features that are missing. We'll just maintain it and keep it healthy, of course, but TAF is there, and that is one small difference between the spotted ray and the SOFIA analysis, is that in the spotted ray example we're using Icy Staff, but in the SOFIA analysis we're successfully using just the TAF package. I'll quickly bring up a slide deck that I was showing to the SOFIA team a few months ago when I was basically telling them that this might be something worth looking into. So TAF, the ICES experience, and SOFIA exploration. It's about automation. You know, the assessment, it runs very quickly. It can be rerun, and you can change a small thing and then run everything again easily. Those are the benefits of having a fully scripted assessment. Many of you have a fully scripted assessment. Many of you also have almost fully scripted, that there are some sort of manual steps in between scripts. Modular design, many of you may write your assessment in one monolithic script, be it R Markdown or just a plain R script. But in TAF, we have had good experience and with more modular design, basically splitting the entire assessment into 4 separate parts that are linked, so one runs after the other. Using this standardized structure, we have features supporting data provenance. That is, it basically forces the user to specify where the data came from, and it also encourages the user to script what kind of data processing is being done. That is, filtering the data or averaging or whatever things you will do before you run the actual model. Reproducibility, reviewability, online data repository. Okay, this is just to give a little bit of context to this. So we have an agreed way to work using these standardized scripts that are run sequentially, where each script reads the output from the previous steps. This is really what I was thinking of to give a little bit of insight into what these 4 scripts do. You will recognize these steps from your own analysis, that we start with some pre-processing of the data. We run the analysis, we extract the results of interest, let's say numbers at age or F at age or spawning stock biomass or anything like that. And finally, we do some plots and tables. So it's natural for, I think, most stock assessors to split their work into those 4 scripts. And that is what I wanted to say before sort of pointing at them here. I think for time constraints, I'll just, well, let's see if it runs just off the cuff. So we have here, let's see. I'll delete. So these folders, data model, output, and report, delete. They appear, there we go, when I run the script. So data.r will create the data folder with some goodies inside, and so on. Let's just see if it does that. So we have data.r here. It's 27 lines where it pre-processes the data and writes out some files. So how do we do? I guess we can run. Oops. So it did that. It created this folder with some files in it, the catch and the survey and the summary. And likewise, we can run model.r. There's a command called source TAF, which is the same as source. It just shows what time it is, in case we were wondering. Output and report. So now we have what we already had before, or sort of remnants of a previous run, that model.r ran and it created this, and output created that, and finally report created a picture of the survey. Very data limited method that is just based on the survey trends. Let me quickly just transition smoothly to the Area 37. So if you go to github.com, what's there? Area 37. Again, we recognize data, model, output, and report. And we can see that Arni and Rishi have been working on this, and there's version 2.3. Yeah, so what I did was actually to split a big R Markdown script that Rishi showed me into those 4 different parts, which was relatively easy. I changed the paths all to be relative and sort of yeah, made it so that it should run on all of your computers. It needs SRAplus, which in turn needs over 100, wow, close to 200 packages of dependencies, but it works. Yeah, is there. And I think I will just highlight how it, yeah, maybe at the end of it, I'll just say that it takes over an hour to run. So to facilitate things, we have sort of made releases. The last one was on April 11th. And with those releases, we, first of all, we note for our own interest and everyone else's what features were sort of changed or introduced in this release. But at least as importantly, and really the original reason we organize the work in releases is to make these results available to ourselves and anyone else, because they take maybe a couple of hours to run each time. So this has the results from that analysis. But the very important part is, of course, that anyone can run it and give it a couple of hours and get the same exact results. I think I'll stop there and give the floor back to Rishi.
Rishi, you need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Arni, for showing the analysis there. I think we don't have a whole lot of time to go into the details of all this, so I'm not going to worry about all the details again here. We don't have enough time here. So just the analysis that Arni showed is all now available. There's one where we use the aggregate analysis, and then we did an analysis where we actually split it out by species groupings, which is available on my GitHub repository with the same structure and syntax that Arni showed. People can, download that entire package or the zip file of it and install it on their machine and replicate it. But the comparisons here are like, this is what GFCM does in terms of their stocks overfished over time, fluctuates around 75%. This is what SOFIA did in 2020. It was around 65%. And this is sort of the newest analysis that we've been doing, where we split it up by species groupings, and we had information on some stocks within those groupings, which were sort of the basis of depletion priors using a standardized method. And we come up with a very similar rate of about 70% overfished as compared to what GFCM is reporting. Not saying this is better, but these are just methods which are how we are assessing the state of the fisheries in different approaches. And essentially, I think they're all within the same ballpark, but we've got standardized outputs depending on species groupings that you can then get from this area. And just like to acknowledge a bunch of people at UW, at FAO, at NOAA, Imperial, and GRC who worked on different pieces of us over time. And this is a pretty massive project, and it's still pretty preliminary in where we are at. And hopefully it'll be a lot more tighter within the future, but I'll leave it open to questions now. I just wanted to show you the last thing, which was we have a way of now organizing this by species groupings, and this is my repository showing you, the coastal set of stocks, again, using the same structure that Arni has, and you've got all the output standardized here now with all your analysis. You've got everything, as Arni said, in a release which has the entire analysis for that grouping, which you can download and see what it says for any of those stocks. So this is where we are at, and keep it open to questions now. Thanks.
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation from you and Arni. And audience, we have about 5 minutes to answer your questions. So please go ahead and type them in the questions chat box, and I will read them to our speakers. And meanwhile, I also want to remind you that I encourage you to share the recording of this webinar with interested colleagues. It will be uploaded to the NOAA Central Library YouTube channel in a couple of hours after we end the presentation. And I've put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat box now. So we'll give you a couple of seconds to see if some of these questions arrive. And Arni, did you want to join us as well?
Yes, please.
Excellent.
And we've got our contacts here as well if people want to send us an email later on. So.
Excellent.
Arni, you've got a new email though.
Yeah, let's type that. This is Arni.
Yeah, this is arni@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Excellent.
More robust to where I'm working at any given time. Yeah.
Well, it's
Just a very quick.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a very quick technical note while we wait for questions, that I want to emphasize for those who are so technically inclined to relate to it, that the relationship between the TAF package and Icy Staff is going to be that Icy Staff will be a very thin layer on top of it. It basically depends on TAF. And so this is not going to be a fork where they're going different directions, but Icy Staff will be a neat layer of all the Icy specifics on top of the core TAF.
Thank you. Well, it looks like we might not have any questions today. And so I think I'm going to, did you have any last comments, gentlemen, or Kristen?
This is Kristen. I have a quick question for Arni. Are you continuing to work on TAF development, or is that no longer on your portfolio?
It is. I am changing a job. I'm going to be joining SPC in New Caledonia, and I have negotiated with them that I will continue to be the maintainer of the TAF package, along with Colin Miller as co-author. So yes, it's no longer an IC's thing. That is really the important point there. And if some big entity like NOAA or FAO or SPC or anyone would like, they could also add a thin layer of their specifics on top of the core TAF package. So yes, I continue to stand very firmly behind the TAF.
Okay, maybe a chat further at some other time would be good. We're thinking about it.
Cool, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, it looks like we didn't have any questions today. So thank you guys for your presentation. And Kristen, as always, thank you for organizing the National Stock Assessment Science Series. To everyone who joined us, I'm glad you joined us for this library seminar. And as always, NOAA is very proud to present the work of the NOAA community and its partners like FAO. And we hope you'll join us again for National Stock Assessment Science Seminar, which is hosted the first Thursday of the month at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All you need to do is go to library.seminars@noaa.gov to register. And in September, we'll have a second special event, special webinar on September 23rd as well. So you've got two science seminars coming up in the next month. Thank you, everybody.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, just to let people know, we have a double feature coming. The first one on September 2nd, which we'll be talking, our speaker will be discussing simulations on a state space stock assessment model for the Gulf of Maine haddock. And then a second seminar on September 23rd, when we will be learning more about the fishery integrated modeling system. So kind of a double feature for people in September.
I'm looking forward to it. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care.
Thanks, Lisa.
No problem.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
No
Cheers.
problem.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.